Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. This week I'm speaking with my friend Corey DeAngelis, author of The Parent Revolution, about education reform, about repealing the Department of Education, and about this beautiful mob of parents who have been woken up by lockdowns and the education industrial complex, who are rising up and taking back education from the machine. Check it out. Welcome to Kibbe on Liberty. Corey, how's it going?
Hey, doing well. Thanks for having me.
It seems like there's a lot going on in terms of education reform and school choice and politics. And I wanted to catch up with you before the election because I think there's a real possibility that finally the opportunity, the payback, the price that the lockdown industrial complex, and particularly led by the teachers unions and the government schools, and what they did to kids and parents, there looks like there's going to be a price to be paid for that. Do you agree?
Absolutely. They finally overplayed their hand. They've awakened a sleeping giant, which happens to be parents who want more of a say in their own kids' education. We saw a little bit of this with Glenn Youngkin in 2021 after his opponent, the Democrat Terry McAuliffe, in a state that apparently went 10 points to Biden the year before. Terry McAuliffe lost on the issue of parental rights in education to Glenn Youngkin after Terry McAuliffe on the final debate stage said, quote, "I don't think parents should be telling schools what they should teach," in a state that closed schools just about as long as California. It was really bad in Virginia. Exit polls found that Glenn Youngkin won with education voters, and that was the number 2 issue in the election. He won with those voters by 6 points. And we now have new polling out from America's most accurate pollster, Atlas Intel, finding Donald Trump similarly beating Kamala Harris on the issue of education by 2 to 3 points, depending on the poll that you're looking at. But the 2 most recent polls have him up. And you may say that's not a lot. That's only 2 or 3 points. But that is a seismic shift towards Republicans on the issue of education, who have been down for decades in double digits, where Democrats have won basically forever on the issue of education. This is a huge shift, and I think it's because of the lockdowns, but also because Kamala Harris is a communist who thinks your kids belong to the government, whereas Donald Trump understands that parents should be in the driver's seat.
It seems like the Democrats have continued to double down on the narrative that parents really aren't qualified to teach their own children. And ultimately, we need to leave the future of children to the experts, the government experts, and particularly after lockdowns, that is so tone deaf. But they seem to be completely captured by the teachers unions, and perhaps they really believe it. But either way, they're not responding to the frustration that parents have.
Yeah, the problem is the Democrat Party is a wholly owned subsidiary of the teachers unions. You look at Randy Weingarten's union, the American Federation of Teachers. This year so far in the election cycle, 99.94% of their campaign contributions went to Democrats. This isn't something new either. It's been like this for decades, with AFT's campaign contributions in excess of 99% of them going to the Democrats. It's a money laundering operation. It ought to be illegal. Voters support school choice, whether you're Republican, Democrat, or independent. People want more opportunities for their kids. And a lot of Democrats use school choice programs. And the problem is that doesn't translate to their elected officials voting for school choice, because politics is all about special interests coordinating for what they want. The teachers unions want their monopoly on the minds of other people's kids, and they want the monopoly on the money meant for educating your child. But when you ask voters, there's super majority of Democrats, Republicans, and independents support school choice. It's not a partisan issue. It's just become partisan because of special interest politics. Hopefully that'll change soon, especially if we see Donald Trump winning on the issue of education, like we've seen other Republicans like Glenn Youngkin win on the issue of education. Hopefully, at some point, the more that Democrats bleed voters to a new special interest group in town, parents, the kids union, not just the teachers union, they'll have to say, hey, maybe I should listen to those parents. Maybe they do know something about their own kids. Maybe they are the experts for their own children's education. After all, they know and care more about their kids more than anybody else, certainly more than bureaucrats sitting in offices hundreds of miles away.
I think it took a while for parents to realize that the government education system is basically a business model for these bureaucrats, the teachers union, the bosses, the administrators, not even necessarily the teachers, but again, they learned during lockdowns that the parents aren't the customer, and the children's education is not the goal of the machine. So it's a little bit like corporate capture, where you're manipulating the regulatory system, and none of it has to do with the product, and none of it has to do with serving customers. It's serving the government, and the government serving the union. That's it. Widespread appreciation for that corrupt system, I think, is newer than it used to be. Like we used to struggle to get people to appreciate that that this was the way it was, because they probably knew a teacher, and the teacher was probably a good teacher, and they personalized it. But now it's all laid bare.
Yeah, the confidence in the public school system has reached an all-time low, according to Gallup, and that's particularly among Republicans. Fewer than 10% of Republicans have confidence in the public school system, and it's partially because the unions overplayed their hand. They fought for Zoom school. In Chicago, they were calling reopening schools racist. I mean, they threw every lefty buzzword at the wall to see what would stick so that they didn't have to go back to work. It was actually worse than that. They didn't just not want to go to work. They knew that they could leverage the closures for more money, and they got billions of dollars from taxpayers, $190 billion since March of 2020 in so-called COVID relief. It wasn't even used for reopening the schools. So they did whatever they could to profit off of closing schools. It's a really perverse set of incentives that's baked into the government school system. And Republicans in particular, and just rational beings that are independents and not radical Democrats, far leftists, they saw that the school's curriculum wasn't aligned with their values. They saw that there was gender ideology in the school through the Zoom school experience. They saw that Zoom school was just an utter failure, obviously, and they saw that the academics weren't great. But they also saw that they were sending their kid to an institution where they feel like those kids were being brainwashed for 13 years of their lives for 7 hours a day. And that's something that low test scores was never going to alone mobilize parents. You also needed to show parents that, it's not just California where these lunatics have infiltrated the classroom. It's in states like Texas as well. It's in red states where you have the school boards have supposedly nonpartisan elections, so everybody runs as an independent. But that just means that even in deep red areas, you have Democrats taking over the school boards and influencing the curriculum to raise other people's children. The weird thing, Matt, is the left doesn't even have to have their own kids anymore. In a sense, they've been able to infiltrate the school system. They can still direct and shape the direction of this country by raising other people's children for long periods of time. You think Hollywood and corporate media has far-reaching impacts on culture? No, that's a fraction of the damage that the government school system can do. Having kids go to a government-run institution, learning or believing that big government's the solution to all of our problems, that's going to lead our country down towards socialism unless we fix something soon. And the good news is we are fixing it. We've had 12 states now in the past 3 years alone pass universal school choice, meaning all families can take their kids' taxpayer money to the public, private, charter, or homeschool that best works for them and aligns with their values. And we're just getting started. But this is in the past 3 years alone, we've had more advancement on the issue of school choice than in the preceding 3 decades. So, Matt, this is why I dedicated my new book, The Parent Revolution, to Randy Weingarten and the teachers unions for overplaying their hand and inadvertently doing more to advance school choice and homeschooling than anyone could have ever imagined. I actually have an endorsement on the back from Ted Cruz, senator from my home state of Texas. He says, "You can ruin Randy Weingarten's day by reading this book."
So she was actually a catalyst to the Glenn Youngkin upset that you referenced earlier, and I have to go to Detroit because Randy Weingarten went to Detroit just a couple days ago. I'm not sure exactly when, to help Kamala Harris, and I don't think it was the same event, but of course Lizzo went to Detroit. Apparently she's from Detroit. That's the sense I get. And it's fascinating how tone deaf it is. And I'm not gonna I'll pick on Lizzo a little bit, but it's emblematic of how defense of the government education system works. She gets on her private jet, she flies to Detroit, and says that not aware of really what she's saying. I suspect I support Kamala Harris because she is going to make America look like Detroit. And I'm like, that's pretty much the worst.
I am Donald Trump, and I approve this message.
Right.
He needs to turn that into a campaign ad.
Yeah. And then they followed up with Randy Weingarten saying that not only did they save Detroit schools, but they made them better. And I like these two statements couldn't be more tone deaf as to where American parents are. Tell us what's really going on in Michigan and particularly Detroit public schools.
Yeah, every time that Randy Weingarten opens her mouth, it should be counted as an in-kind contribution to the school choice movement and in this election for Donald Trump in particular. But in Detroit, I mean, yeah, Randy went on stage, and this video wasn't really shared by her personal Twitter account. It wasn't even shared by the union's Twitter account, which I thought was weird because they always clip little segments and put it on their YouTube. It's not there. I ended up finding it in a random YouTube account, and I only knew that it happened because she posted a picture of her in Detroit saying, "We strengthen public schools in Detroit." And first I was thinking, like, how does she even rationalize that? So I went and found the actual video, clipped it, put it on Twitter, now X. But there's no rational basis or argument to be made unless she's talking about strengthening the teachers' unions and putting more money back into Democrat campaign coffers. It has nothing to do with student outcomes. You look at Detroit, they've consistently ranked at the bottom, the worst city in America, according to the nation's report card for math and reading outcomes, despite spending a lot more than the national average. They spend about $22,000 per kid per year, according to the Census Bureau. You can look it up. That is much higher than their average private school tuition, which is about $10,000 per student. So more than double. They're getting worse results. You want to talk about what the specific results are? Well, they have 4% proficiency for kids in math on the nation's report card. And they have, they did a little bit better on reading, 5% proficiency. Oh, so great that they strengthened the public school system in Detroit. I mean, it's horrible. It's become more of a jobs program for adults than an education initiative for kids. They're losing students, hiring more people. They care about the administrators. They don't give a crap about the kids. The kids don't have a union. Until recently, the parents are the kids' union at this point, and they're winning at the ballot box. But Randy Weingarten herself, she makes over $500,000 a year to do what? To go flail her arms all over the place, to argue against school choice, to fight to trap kids in her failing government schools that we call public schools, that are just failure factories, that are meant to employ adults as opposed to giving kids a better shot, a better opportunity, a better future. And so this really should count as look. Randy also went and stumped for Terry McAuliffe the day before the election in Virginia in 2021. The school closer was his campaign closer, and it didn't work out for them. It's not going to work out for Kamala Harris either. Tim Walz, I'm sure you saw the viral video of his education appointee in Minnesota. He said that you can't be a critical race theorist and be pro-United States. That's why I'm a critical race theorist, he said. He also went on to say that the U.S. government needs to be overthrown because he's a critical race theorist as well. and you have these people running the education system, that should be disqualifying for Kamala Harris. This should also be disqualifying that she went to AFT, Randy's union, to their annual convention right after she announced her presidency, her intent to run for the presidency. And she said that Randy Weingarten was a close friend and an advisor. This is the lady that fought to keep schools closed, lobbied the CDC to make it happen, and has shoveled more funding into the school system year after year, hasn't translated to better results. Trump wants to get rid of the Department of Education. He's right. The word education is not in the U.S. Constitution. It's a violation of the 10th Amendment. It's spent nearly $2 trillion since its inception. It started in 1979 by Jimmy Carter. It was just a payoff to the teachers' unions who endorsed him, the National Education Association, the largest labor union in the country, and it hasn't led to better results. If we were able to get rid of the department, we could send that money back to the states to see as they see fit, to spend as they see fit, and it would be more local control. I don't know how much momentum that has in Congress right now, but there is a school choice bill moving through Congress right now that passed through the House Ways and Means Committee. And just the other day, Donald Trump said that he would sign that same bill if it gets to his desk. Hopefully the Republicans keep control of the House and Senate so they can get that bill to Donald Trump's desk.
I have exciting news. Our latest documentary, The Free Life, Portrait of an Artist, a project that we've been working on for several years here at Free the People, is finally available to view. This is a story of my friend Carlos Luna, an artist who had to flee communist Cuba in order to create the beautiful things that he does now in Miami, Florida. His grandmother actually told him, "You must leave if you want to create your art." It's a beautiful story. It's a hero's journey. And you have an opportunity now to see it for the very first time. Go to watch.freethepeople.org. It's $9.99. This is the first time you'll be able to see it. We've been showing it at film festivals. We've been winning awards. Now you have your chance. I'm eager to hear what you think about it. So check it out. Watch.freethepeople.org. So Thomas Massie, the tremendous congressman from Kentucky, has the legislation. I think it's like one sentence repealing, abolishing the Department of Education. It's funny because this, I'm old enough to remember when the Republican Party was part of their most fundamental agenda was eliminating the Department of Education and even other wasteful and counterproductive and stupid government agencies. And that was in the 1990s, and somehow we lost that thread. It's encouraging to see it coming back because you're pointing this out, and if people don't do this, follow Corey on X because he is constantly posting in very simple to understand ways the counterproductive nature of increased federalization, increased government, federal funding. The correlation is the opposite, right? The more we spend, the worse things get, and it's like an iron law at this point.
Yeah, we're looking at the wrong outcome, though. We're looking at academics. We have this fairy tale belief that the school systems for educating kids, it's actually more about indoctrinating kids at this point, and even more so, it's about employing adults. It's not about the children. You look since 2000, we have federal data on this from the National Center for Education Statistics, and I share this chart all the time, but since 2000, the number of students in the system barely increased by about 5% since 2000. The number of teachers in the system twice as fast by about 10%. The number of principals and assistant principals increased by about 30 to 40%. The number of administrators in the system increased by about 95%, about 19 times the rate of increase of the number of students. And if you zoom into different districts, the pattern is all over the place. If you look at Chicago, for example, they spend about $30,000 a kid per year now. In the last few years, since 2019, they've increased their staffing by 20% just from 2019, but they've decreased the number of students by 10%. In what other competitive industry Do you lose your customers, your bleeding customers, and then you say, oh, it's a great idea to go hire 20% more staff? You'd never do that if you actually had to cater to the needs of your customers and spend money wisely. And so it's got to stop. And the only way out of this mess is to fix the incentives that are currently built into the status quo school system that's failing so many kids. You got to have bottom up accountability, because we saw that top down, the so-called model of, I call it the fairy tale model of democratic accountability. It doesn't work. What did the unions say year after year before COVID? They said, look, we're accountable. If you don't like what's happening in the schools, you can come to the school board meeting, voice your opinions, and we'll listen to you. We saw how that worked out over the past few years. They called us domestic terrorists when we argued against CRT and gender ideology in the schools. They cut off parents' mics. They're still doing that. And they don't see you as a customer. They see you as a nuisance. So they try to silence and bully you into submission. Good thing is that only emboldened parents to push back even harder. But if you had the ability to vote with your feet, if you could take your money elsewhere, the school board would have to think a little bit before they labeled you as an enemy or an evil person. They'd have to say, hey, maybe we should not cut off their mic. Maybe we should actually listen to them, or maybe we should change our game and do a better job. Maybe we'll focus more on the basics as opposed to indoctrination so we don't upset anybody. Maybe we just provide an education and let parents inculcate their values at home, because they're the parents. We're not the parents. The parents are the primary decision makers, not the government. And then they would do a better job. And we've seen that happen with school choice. Think about Florida. In Florida, and by the way, DeSantis owes his initial gubernatorial victory in 2018 to school choice moms, according to a Wall Street Journal article that came out the next day, indicating that exit polls from CNN of all places found that Black moms in particular came out in force for DeSantis after his opponent, after his opponent, Andrew Gillum, the Democrat, came out against the school choice program that was already benefiting over 100,000 kids at the time, disproportionately non-white kids, disproportionately low-income kids. And they went out and voted for DeSantis. They might have disagreed with him on everything else, but they agreed with him on getting a better education. They didn't want to lose their scholarships. They became single issue voters on the issue of education freedom. And we might see that play out in the swing states in particular with Donald Trump in November, because Kamala Harris has made it clear she's against education freedom. Tim Walz as well. They're in bed with the teachers unions. They don't give a crap about the kids. And in swing states, they're already benefiting from school choice. In Arizona, 80,000 kids are enrolled in their private school choice program that went universal just a couple of years ago in 2022. There were so many families that flooded the government website. They crashed the government website because there was so much demand for school choice. It might be because it was a government website, I don't know, but it was also because a lot of families just wanted opportunities. In North Carolina, another swing state, 55,000 families were immediately on the wait list to get a scholarship after they passed universal school choice just last year. They had to bring the legislature back to approve the scholarships to get those kids off the wait list. Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, this is a must-win state for Kamala. You would have thought that he would have been the VP choice. Everybody thought it was going to be Josh Shapiro. He was the obvious pick. He's in a must-win swing state for Kamala Harris. Why didn't she pick him? Well, it's because the teachers unions didn't allow her to. In 2022, right before his gubernatorial election, he was up in the polls, but he still felt compelled to signal support to parents. He didn't want to be like Terry McAuliffe. He didn't want an upset. And so he put private school choice into his education platform right before the election. He read the tea leaves. Kamala Harris didn't read the tea leaves. And so she's probably going to lose Pennsylvania because she is in bed with the teachers unions. She had to go to Tim Walz, the tyrant, who is from Minnesota, a state that's increased their spending on education by about 21% since he's taken office. But they've dropped in the education rankings. Their test scores have gotten worse. It's the definition of insanity, throwing more money at the problem, doing the same thing over and over again, and expecting different results. You're not going to get better results.
Yeah.
We've increased spending in the US by 164% since 1970. Have the outcomes gotten 164% better? No, they haven't gotten any better.
They've gotten worse. I want to go back to something you said, and then I really want to focus on this parent revolution that you've written about, and I'm seeing happen in my own personal experience. The one question I have, and I don't know if you know the answer to this, but the drop in attendance in government schools, part of that is exit. Part of that is parents leaving and taking their kids to a different type of school, or maybe taking them out of the system and doing like pod learning, homeschooling, all that innovation that happened during the lockdowns. But how many kids, particularly in the inner city, are just falling through the cracks? They're just left behind because the machine doesn't care. Do you
Yeah,
know,
we don't
do you know anything about
know,
this?
right?
Yeah.
We don't know the specific numbers because they're kind of off the radar now. Yeah, a lot of families did increase homeschooling, and that's another silver lining of the pandemic, is that homeschooling has at least doubled since pre-pandemic levels. And so a lot of parents who might have thought that they couldn't figure it out, they got a little bit of a taste of homeschooling. Some of them got crappy government education at home through Zoom school, but some families said, how about I just log off Zoom, figure it out? And they started to figure out that, hey, my kids are a lot less anxious. They are doing more at a fraction of the time. They are actually excited to learn things instead of having it force-fed down their throats in the government school system. At this point, right before the bell, you better be interested in math. And then when the bell rings, you got to get up, go to the next class, and you better be interested in English. But what if the kid was still interested in math and they got to move on? That's just not how people function. That's not how you or I learn from day to day. So homeschooling has a lot of benefits, and you can still socialize. You can just capitalize on the positive forms of socialization without getting a lot of the negative forms of socialization that I saw in some of my government schools: drugs, gang activity, and other activity you don't want your kids around. You can create a better community for your kid. Catholic schooling has seen some increase in their numbers as well. They basically never closed. And guess what? They didn't see any statistically significant decline in any academic outcomes throughout the pandemic period, showing you that school closures was part of the reason for those declines. But as far as how many kids are getting lost in the cracks, we just don't really know. And as far as the chronic absenteeism, where kids are just not showing up to school, I think it's a little bit of monkey see, monkey do. During the pandemic, those kids saw that their teachers didn't prioritize education. They were on the beach. Chicago Teachers Union boss, a board member, Sarah Justice, she was complaining about their school reopenings while she was poolside in Puerto Rico, thousands of miles away. Somehow it was safe to go do that, but it wasn't safe enough to go back to work. I mean, obviously they just didn't want to go back to work. And they obviously also knew, and Chicago did see, billions of dollars just in Chicago alone in so-called COVID relief that wasn't spent on reopening the schools. It is a tragedy, but it would all be worth it in the sense that we are freeing families from the clutches of the teachers unions once and for all. That money that is relegated to the government school system, parents now have a say. They can, hey, look, if you like your public school, you can keep your public school. In places like Arizona, you can still choose to take your money there and send your kid there. But if not, every single family in Arizona, for example, can say, hey, I'm going to take that state portion of funding that's for my kid that we're already spending. I'm going to take it to another school, like a private school. And what they've found, I mentioned Florida earlier. I should have got back to this point. I went off on a tangent. But what I wanted to point out was that in Florida, for example, they were at the bottom of the pack in the nation's report card. They were doing horrible on standardized tests. But since they've expanded school choice over the past couple of decades, they're at the top of the pack on academic outcomes according to the nation's report card. And when you look at the U.S. News and World Report, they were most recently ranked #1 on education. And it's not a money issue. They spend 27% less than the national average in Florida. School choice is a rising tide that lifts all boats. Competition works in education just like it does in every other industry.
Regular viewers of Kibbe on Liberty already know how obsessed I have been with the pandemic industrial complex and all of the stupid, authoritarian, and downright evil things that the government did to us during COVID-19. Well, I'm proud to announce a new investigative series that looks to get to the bottom of all of that. It's called The Cover-Up, and I'm producing it in cooperation with Blaze TV. The only place you're going to see this is Blaze TV, so go to FauciCoverup.com/Kibbe and use the code FauciLied for $30 off your annual subscription. Do it now. The truth is out there. So it's something that we've argued theoretically from day one. You can go all the way back to Milton Friedman that competition would actually strengthen the public schools as well, because it forces it forces the administrators to let education actually happen, but it also frees up teachers who are trapped in the system who actually want to focus on children first. So it's everything we knew would happen, but now, as you point out, we have data. The question, and I want to get to this parent revolution thing, because I couldn't be more excited about it. And I told this story to Tiffany Justice from Moms for Liberty when she was on my show, and I got to attend their big annual event here in Washington, D.C. And it strikes me that everything about this movement is an echo of what happened with the Tea Party, 2008, 2009. A lot of people that I met at Moms for Liberty would say again and again something that I heard from Tea Party activists back in the day. I've never done this before, but I felt an obligation, not just for my children, but for my community, to step up and try to fix the system. And of course, they did that first at school board meetings, where, as you mentioned, they were called domestic terrorists for daring to question the machine. I don't know if you remember this, but in 2009, Obama's campaign arm was called Organizing for Obama. They actually called Tea Partiers at town hall meetings domestic terrorists. So the script is the same.
We've seen this movie before.
Yeah. Domestic terrorist, racist, angry, violent. It's all the same accusations, because they're trying to demonize people that are actually doing supposedly what our system is built on, which is showing up, taking responsibility, participating in the democratic process. But the left doesn't like it, and I see this. I don't know if this is a compliment or not, but as a former Tea Party organizer, I see this as Tea Party 2.0, in the sense that this might be the election where these moms and dads and parents become the swing vote that actually pushes the kind of reforms that you've been talking about.
Yeah, if you're catching flack, that means you're probably over the target. And with Moms for Liberty and parents, boots on the ground, they're definitely over the target. The teachers unions have had their foot soldiers for a long time. They were basically the only special interests in education for a very long time at the K-12 level. But now the kids have a union of their own. They're called Parents. I'm glad Moms for Liberty and other groups have chapters all over the country of people locking arms. And that's how you make a difference in politics. You have to have groups of people, a large enough voting bloc, if you will, to be able to make politicians scratch their heads and think about every decision that they make going forward. And so the parents on the ground sparking this revolution because they had to, because they saw that their kids were in institutions that just they weren't having it anymore. People don't want to send their kids to schools where they feel like they're being indoctrinated year after year with them not having a say in the conversation. Vodi Bakum said it best. We cannot continue to send our children to Caesar for their education and be surprised when they come home as Romans. Well, the good news is parents aren't surprised anymore. They've woken up. They're never going back to sleep. They made a huge difference in the Virginia election for Glenn Youngkin. I think this is going to be an important issue for Trump as well. I think he already knows it's an important issue. Why do you think at all of his campaign stops, basically in the past month, he's been mentioning universal school choice. He's been mentioning other public school reforms as well. He's been mentioning abolishing the Department of Education. He's not in the primaries anymore. He doesn't have to talk about things that mobilize Republicans. He knows that this is supported across party lines among Republicans, Democrats, and independents. So this all looks like great news. We've seen when they called parents domestic terrorists, what the school board led, the National School Boards Association sent a letter to the Biden administration saying that under the Patriot Act, parents should be investigated for quote unquote domestic terrorism. I mean, it's insane what they did. And most people remember that part. But what most people don't remember, we found through FOIA requests that in that same letter, earlier drafts of that letter called for the military to be deployed to school board meetings to tell parents to sit down and shut up. They later removed that part because they knew they were crossing the line. But the domestic terrorism part crossed the line as well. But since
everything,
then,
by the way, everything about it crosses the line.
Exactly. So, but like, I mean, they knew that they were doing something stupid, but they thought, oh, maybe if we take out the military part, I guess things will be okay. It was not okay. They've mostly been able to operate in the dark, but now we have social media. You can talk all the negative you want about social media, but now sunlight is the best disinfectant. You see what's going on with Libs of TikTok. I mean, we're just showing people what's happening in the public schools. That's how Libs of TikTok became so famous and has so much of a following. They're just sharing the videos of what's happening in the schools, the teachers themselves bragging about what they're doing to indoctrinate kids, and parents aren't having it. And so since that letter was sent by the NSBA, 26 states have already pulled their funding or their membership from the School Boards Association. You play stupid games, you win stupid prizes, and the teachers' unions have been so drunk on power for so long, they don't know how to reverse course. So they're going to continue promoting their own demise, pushing their own death spiral, and it's their own fault. It's a glorious thing to see because now it means, particularly in red states, families are getting school choice like we've never seen before. I wish Milton Friedman were alive today to see his ideas finally coming to fruition. Have the money follow the child, just like we do with everything else, with every other taxpayer-funded initiative. You think about scholarships for college. Do you have to take that to an assigned school? No, you can take it to the college that you want, whether that's Pell Grants or the GI Bill. You think about pre-K, things that Democrats support, like the Head Start program. That money doesn't have to go to an assigned pre-K provider. You can take it to a religious pre-K if you want. You could take it, the money follows the decision of the family. You think about food stamps. Democrats support food stamps. Do they say you have to take it to the assigned government provider of government cheese? No, you can take it to the private grocery store you would like to purchase your goods and services from. We do this with Medicaid vouchers, Section 8 housing vouchers. I'm not arguing we should have all these other programs. I'm not saying we should spend more on any of these other programs. All I'm arguing when we're talking about school choice is that we apply that same logic to K through 12 education. I'm not saying we should spend more money, but if we're going to spend the money, it should go to people, not buildings. We should fund students, not systems. We should fund individuals, not institutions. And so Democrats on these issues should just be logically consistent. If we're going to spend the money, that's a separate argument. But if we do spend it, it should follow the student and not the building.
So speaking of history rhyming, you may recall this as well, that the DOJ targeting parents who show up at school board meetings in 2010, after Tea Party activists had such an impact on the midterm elections. Lois Lerner and the IRS started going after Tea Party organizations, and I think and by the way, pretty much got away with it. Like she got a nice payout in retirement, and they accomplished their goal, which was to tie up some of the best activist organizations going into the next election. That's what they were trying to do. But it strikes me that it's kind of it's a whack-a-mole thing now, because as you say, the power of social media, it's hard for people that weren't around back then, but the power of social media is so much bigger, particularly on X, than it was in 2010, 2012. And people can see for themselves that this crazy stuff that the government is doing to citizens just trying to participate in the democratic process. We now see it, so the backlash is more real. And we can go to other issues if you want, but I gotta point out that one of the things I enjoy most about your X account is every time you're confronted with a union boss or a state representative in the pockets of the unions, or a congressman or a congresswoman opposing school choice, you inevitably point out that they sent their kids to private school. It reminds me a little bit of Gavin Newsom going to the French Laundry during lockdowns, or this I forget his name, but this guy in New York City who was the czar of lockdowns, simultaneously going to wild sex parties while he was prohibiting New Yorkers to go to work. It's a little bit of that sort of level of hypocrisy.
Yeah, Gavin Newsom had the French Laundry hypocrisy, but he did a press conference complaining about the failures of public Zoom school, that it was so horrible, it was so hard. Come to find out, he sent his kids to private school that had in-person learning options. So he was a hypocrite on school choice. He's a hypocrite on school closures. He's a hypocrite on restaurants with the French Laundry. He's a total hypocrite all around. But Joe Biden, he went to private school, sent his kids to private school. Kamala Harris's stepkids, at least, went to private school, which I don't blame any of these people for having that opportunity for their kids, but they shouldn't pull the ladder up from behind themselves and fight against school choice for others. You think about, we talked about Chicago earlier. They said it was racist to reopen schools. Guess what else their teachers union boss called racist? She said just a year or two ago that school choice was racist. And come to find out, recently we discovered that she sent her own kid to a private Catholic school. Again, I don't blame her for that, but she said the reason she had to do so was because of defunding of the public schools. Chicago public schools spend $30,000 a kid. Her child's private school tuition is currently half of that amount, $15,000 a kid. These are failure factories run by the unions, and their bosses know it, so they avoid these schools like the plague for their own kids. And I don't blame them for that, but let other parents have a choice to escape your indoctrination centers that we call public schools if they would want to do that. And if not, if you're confident in the public schools, well, one, send your own kids there, but two, let parents decide. If they're so great, you shouldn't have to worry about any form of competition whatsoever, because families will continue to send their children to your schools. The problem is they know better than anybody else that their schools are horrible academically and other ways as well, unsafe, and they would never send their own children there, but they relegate other people's kids, particularly low-income families' kids, to schools that they cannot escape. So in this sense, school choice is an equalizer too. If you have that money follow the child, rich people already have school choice. Now you have less advantaged families having that opportunity too. And that's what the unions fear more than anything else, because right now they know that they're not going to be able to lock other people's kids from advantaged families in their schools. They know that they have the low-income families stuck with no exit options. And once school choice passes, like we've seen in so many states now over the past few years, low-income families get a choice too. You think about DC. They spend about $30,000 a kid in DC too. Their voucher is only about $10,000 per kid, yet they have thousands of kids on wait list every year trying to get a voucher for a better education. If it was about money, you'd think they'd choose the well-funded government schools as opposed to the voucher that's only a third of the funding to go to a private school. It's not about money. It's about incentives. And 95% of the kids using the DC voucher program are Black or Hispanic. And the average household income of kids using that program is only about $30,000 per year per household in the District of Columbia. So look, there are other programs that higher income families are using the program as well, but we shouldn't pick winners and losers. Everybody should be eligible. It should be universal. We're spending the money for everybody to get an education, regardless of your income. That money should follow the child for everybody. No one should be forced to pay twice. And so in states like Arizona, you have everybody being eligible in states like Florida, Iowa, Arkansas, Utah, and a bunch of others, with more on the way, including my home state of Texas. We thought we were going to pass universal school choice in my home state of Texas last year. Governor Abbott made it a big priority. He's been campaigning across the state on the issue of school choice. The Senate passed the bill easily, 18-13. It went to the Republican-controlled House, where 21 Republicans voted against their own party platform with all the Democrats and the teachers unions against school choice. But guess what? After the primaries, 14 of those guys are gone. That basically never happens in politics. Incumbents usually win 95% of the time, but now parents went to the ballot box, they made their voices heard, and said, and this has become a big priority for them. They want their kids to have a choice in their education. They want an opportunity for their children. And now, for the first time in Texas history, our House of Representatives has the votes for universal school choice. All eyes on Texas next year in 2025, for Texas being the biggest state to go all in on school choice coming up soon. 10% of the nation's students at the K-12 level are in Texas. So when this happens, this is going to be a seismic shift of more kids in America getting a say, parents getting a say, and kids getting an opportunity.
At Kibbe on Liberty, freedom is a lifestyle 24/7, something you live and breathe and wear every day. If that describes you, you need the very best Liberty swag in the market today, just like this shirt I happen to be wearing. Go to freethepeople.org/KOL and check out our exciting merch. You too can love liberty and look cool. Let's wrap up with, I know you talk about this, and I know there's certain viewers on my show who are hardcore libertarians that are concerned that various school choice programs somehow open the door to the vampire regulators of government schools getting into private institutions. And by the context is I went to Grove City College, and Ted Kennedy, the infamous senator from Massachusetts, who was the biggest advocate of government control of schooling at the time, went after Grove City College simply because some of our students were getting government student loans. And so the college decided to opt out, and they created their own support programs for students with financial need and just got out of the system altogether. I am sympathetic to the idea, very sympathetic to the idea that we need to break up the education industrial complex by whatever works, whatever is practical. But what's your response to libertarians that are anxious that this is going to let the government screw up the private schools?
Look no further than Massachusetts, New York, Rhode Island, other lefty strongholds. They have zero private school choice, yet they have the worst homeschooling laws on the books. They have the most regulations in the private sector of education, and they don't have school choice. So I'd argue this is a separate issue. If you look at it the other side of the spectrum, states like Iowa and Oklahoma, they have universal school choice as far as you can go with education freedom, and they have some of the best homeschooling laws on the books as when it comes to lower amounts of regulation. So I would say this is about authoritarians being in office, not about giving families a choice to take the money we're already spending to use it at a private provider of education or homeschool or not. I mean, this is all voluntary. We've had school choice in this country for over 150 years in some states, like in Maine and Vermont. More recently, the push has come from Milwaukee in the 1990s. But we have over 30 states have some form of private school choice already. None of them have forced anybody to take the money. It's all voluntary. As libertarians, we should understand that, hey, if you like, I don't have to choose this for myself, but I should allow other families to make that cost-benefit decision for their own kids, whether they want to accept their own taxpayer dollars back to be able to use for private education. Because the alternative is you have all these kids and that money being forced into the government-run school system that's completely controlled by the government. We should at least allow for an escape valve, an escape hatch for families who want to be able to vote with their feet, who couldn't do it without the resources to do so. We shouldn't make perfect the enemy of the good. And politics, as you know, Matt, is all about organized interest pushing for what they want. The unions do this all the time. But when you have school choice, you can actually reduce the likelihood of government overreach in the future in at least 3 ways. One, when you have more families benefiting from private and home education through school choice, you build that broader coalition to fight back against authoritarian overreach in the future. And when more people are using private and home education, it becomes more mainstream. When something is more mainstream, the authoritarians may be less likely to call to regulate something that before they might have saw as some icky thing that only a few people were doing. So that should reduce the likelihood of regulation. And if you have fewer people being indoctrinated through this escape hatch in the government schools, then you're going to have fewer people voting to regulate private and home education out of existence in the future, because currently, when you have 90% of kids going to government-run institutions today, they're learning or believing at least that big government is the solution to all of their problems. Well, they're going to regulate homeschooling in the future. They're going to vote to increase taxes in the future. So there is a doomsday scenario that's more likely, which is the status quo continues unchecked, and these people become voters in the future to take away your freedoms, whether you like it or not, without you even having a choice to take the money somewhere else. So let's not make perfect the enemy of the good. By the way, Randi Weingarten's made the same argument against school choice. She's not doing it because she's a libertarian. She loves big government. She's a socialist who wants to control the minds of other people's kids. She wants to keep her gravy train going. And she knows that she can't just make the usual lefty arguments against school choice in red states. So she comes up with these other arguments to make in red states like my home state of Texas and elsewhere. So they're trying to get to pick off conservatives to block education freedom. That's the only reason why they're perpetuating this argument. You look historically. I mean, I mentioned New York and Rhode Island and Massachusetts being horrible on freedom, but also being horrible on school choice. Look in Oregon. They're horrible today as well. But look in Oregon historically. In 1922, they outlawed private education altogether. In fact, thankfully, in 1925, in Pierce versus Society of Sisters, the U.S. Supreme Court struck down that bigoted law where the court famously ruled that, quote, the child is not the mere creature of the state. But they didn't do that because of a school choice program. They did that because they had authoritarians who wanted to control the minds of other people's children. So these are separate issues. And I would argue that, look, people have argued with government shekels come government shackles, but you can get the shackles without the shekels. And so you might as well take the W, or else you're going to be stuck with the L. Take the incremental victory, even if it isn't utopia. We can't make perfect the enemy of the good, and we have to win where we can. Look, I'm libertarian, as far libertarian as you can get. I don't want government involved in anything. And so I'm on your side, but we also have to operate within reality.
So the shorter version is don't be like Randi Weingarten.
Yeah, if you're on Randi Weingarten's side and you're not on Milton Friedman's side and my side, you're probably not the freedom fighter that you think you are.
So where can people find you? Where can they get your book? What are your affiliations these days?
Yeah, I'm a senior fellow at the American Culture Project. I have some other affiliations as well, but that's my top affiliation. And look, the radical left has figured out that they can shape American culture through the school system. We're fighting to get American culture back by giving freedom to families to choose their kids' education with a school that aligns with their values. Yes, I might disagree with the school that you choose, but incrementally, if you have fewer kids in the government schools, it's going to be a trend towards free market solutions in the future. I'm also the author of a national bestseller now. Maybe it's because I dedicated to Randi Weingarten. Maybe it's because Trump endorsed the book. It's called The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. You can find it basically anywhere. It's on sale on Amazon right now if you want to go check that out. I think it's a pretty steep sale at the moment. The Parent Revolution, Rescuing Your Kids from the Radicals Ruining Our Schools. So go check that out.
Okay. It's great to catch up with you, Corey. I hope your voice hangs out till Election Day, because I bet you've been making a lot of pitches these days.
Absolutely. And we'll be up all night on election night. It's going to be a lot of fun. And looking forward to voting today. It's the first day of early voting in Texas. So my wife and I, and the baby. I've joined the parent revolution on the front lines. Angelina's with us, and it's the greatest blessing in the world. It has supercharged me in my fight for school choice because it's become a lot more personal now. And we were already thinking about homeschooling, but now it's like we're definitely homeschooling. I don't want to send Angelina off to any government school. She's staying put with us, and she'll learn a lot more that way.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks, Matt.
Thanks for watching. If you liked the conversation, make sure to like the video, subscribe, and also ring the bell for notifications. And if you want to know more about Free the People, go to freethepeople.org.